Hey everyone, this is DCHL Devin here, and welcome to another episode of an Unexpected Podcast. And this one I wanted to show you as a special version of the podcast where we actually can only host this on YouTube. Traditionally, a podcast is something you can just listen to while you paint. However, in this one, we wanted to go into something special. A lot of people look at a terrain board at a tournament and they're like, how exactly would I set up against my opponent given their army list and their scenario in hand? Well, that's what we're gonna go through today. We're gonna go through exactly what we're thinking. We're gonna show you the board on the screen and we're gonna go through what we're thinking against our opponent. How are we gonna deploy? And of course, joining me as always is Nova Open champion Matt Iverson and also ETC English champion Mick. And then a special guest. Traditionally, Rainier Lee would be on this podcast. However, occasionally we will rotate some of the main hosts with a special guest. And this special guest will be Evan Iverson. He is Matt Iverson's son, but also a prominent player in the community and very good at this game. So without further ado, let's go ahead and give it back to Tim Hines, our channel's host, and he'll walk us through all the scenarios and all the terrain. We won't know anything beforehand, and we'll have to tell you how we would react seeing it for the first time. So let's go ahead and get into it.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of an Unexpected Podcast. My name is Tim, and with me as always, we have Matt, Mick, and Devin, as well as this week's guest, Evan Iverson. On this week's episode, we decided we were going to try and tell you what goes through everyone's minds at a tournament when finding out what scenario they'll be playing, on what table they'll be playing on, and against what type of army they'll be facing. So each person was assigned an 800-point list based on a specific style of play they were given. But they wouldn't know the scenario they'd be playing in, the army they'd be facing, or even the board they'd be playing on. For each person, when it's their turn, I'll roll a dice based on a new tournament organizer pack and determine the scenario from there. And then roll a second die to see which board they'd be given. And finally, I'd roll a third die and choose which person on the podcast army they'll be going up against. And they will tell you how they plan on dealing with that terrain, scenario, and opponent to get the most out of this game. So firstly, I'm going to ask everybody what style of play they were given and what list they decided to make. So, Devin, what style of play were you given and what army did you decide to make out of that?
All right, so I have an 800-point list of Moria and Mordor. So the style of play for me was a horde army that doesn't shoot. These are actually armies that I'm a lot more familiar with, a lot more comfortable with. I love how they, you can make mistakes with them and still maneuver around that. So I went ahead and made kind of a competitive version of that that I thought would be maybe a little competitive. So I have the Undying on Fell Beast. And I was eager to use him because he's rarely used nowadays. He's leading 15 orcs, both with shield and spear. Just evened out really 7 shield, but 6 spear. And Guritz is leading 8 orcs and 4 warg riders. So the 8 orcs are evened out once again, shield and spear. We have Durberts. All right, Durberts is leading 15 goblins, once again evened out, shield and spear. Then we have a Gundabad Shaman. A Gundabad Shaman leading 6 goblins, spear and shield, same combos. And then we have another Gundabad Shaman, 6 spear and shield once again. Remember, I have 3 with spear goblins and 3 with shield guns. They're all 5 points apiece. So then I have a Goblin Captain leading 12. So all of them are either equipped with either a shield or a spear. And so that gives me a total of 72 models. And 3 magic users, a Heroic Striker in Durberts, otherwise a Fell Beast without Heroic Strike, but magic. And of course, the Shatter Shamans, which ideally the list sort of revolves around after the Undying kind of saps their opponent of their will and ability to actually respond to them. So Guritz helps me with my horde, giving me +1 to my entire army to help me in the Maelstrom missions, because I don't really want to be spending a lot of might, especially with the Undying. And otherwise than that, I have plenty of heroic march with this horde with Guritz and my goblin captains. Guritz coming with 3 points of might himself. And that's pretty much it. So that is the format that I have. No bows, no shooting. I'm coming to you.
Okay. Next, I'm going to move on to Mick. Mick, what style of play were you given, and what army did you decide to go with?
Well, Devin will be coming to me. Since I was given an army style of elite, so I decided to go for Rivendell Knights, and my list is essentially Elrond, fully kitted up on a horse, 17 Rivendell Knights with shields, then 1 Rivendell Knight with a banner and a shield, and then Aragorn Strider on a horse with a bow and with an elven cloak, just because I had some spare points. So that turns out to be just 20 models with 6 might points plus however many Aragorn it will make, and 19 bows and 796 points. The reason I chose this army was, well, obviously it had to be elite, but also it's one of those lists which Rivendell Knights have been quite a well, you could potentially call them sort of a superpower in the previous edition of the game, and they're still around these days. And so they're very mobile. They're very strong when they charge. They have a lot of bows, and they have 2 really good heroes here. So hopefully they will give me a lot of options. But obviously, unlike Devin's list, if I make any mistakes, I'm pretty much done for the game.
Okay. Next, I'm going to move over to Evan. Evan, what style of play were you given, and what did you decide to make out of it?
Okay, so I was given a shooting army, and those were basically the only parameters. So I kind of designed my list to be shooty, but it's also got a lot of other things going for it. So I went with a Survivors of Lake Town and Halls of Thranduil army. So obviously there's Bard the Bowman on horse with armor, and with him are his upgrades, which are Alfred, Sigurd, and Tilda. You always take these guys. And then I have in his warband 7 Lake Town militia with shield, 7 Lake Town spear, and 1 Lake Town militia who didn't take any extra equipment. And then in the second warband, I took the Lake Town militia captain, and then again 6 shields, 6 spears, and then Gandalf the Grey on horse with 14 bowmen. And then for my ally in Thranduil's Halls, I took Legolas on horse and a Wood Elf Sentinel. So the basic rationale behind this list is I wanted to take a shooting army, and obviously this army, it's got Bard, it's got Legolas, it's got 14 bows, it's got Blinding Light. So it's got a lot of the bases covered with that. It'll outshoot most, if not all, armies in the game. It also has a large amount of tricks. It's got Bard, who can get up to 6 might, and he's got his free heroic combats and stuff like that. I also added a whole bunch of tricks to it because I like tricks. So there's the Wood Elf Sentinel, which at first I didn't really think he was that good, but now that I've been playing him more, he's actually been incredibly effective. He's basically just a good version of a Spectre. And what I like to do with him is just hide him and then run him around and use his special rule on stuff with low courage. And he also has a bow too, so he helps with that effect. Gandalf also provides tricks. The Lake Town militia captain provides maneuverability with march. And other than that, it's just a nice, relatively large, grindy list.
Okay. And finally, I'm going to move over to Matt. Matt, what style of army were you given, and what did you decide to make out of it?
So I was given a mobility army, and the obvious choice there is the Riders of Theoden Legion, but I decided to do something a little different. So I actually went with the Paths of the Druidan Legendary Legion, and that gives me some mobility-based enhancements that I think are going to be useful with this army. The special rules that go with this legion are, well, kill orc folk, which allows me to reroll 1s when striking at goblins, orcs, or urukai, so that'll help against Devin's army. But also, you get the waypoint special rule, where I get to put down 3 waypoints on the board, which allow me to ignore terrain effects within 6 inches of those waypoints. So I can pretty much nullify most of the terrain that are going to be in the key areas of the board when I want to, which is a really useful rule to have if you're a cavalry-based army. The other thing I get is the know all paths special rule, which means that I'm going to win heroic move roll-offs on a 3-up. So basically, there's only a 1 in 3 chance of the other guy going first, which is also an incredibly useful rule to have when you have a cavalry-based army. So what I took in this army is I took, obviously, Gonbury Gone with 15 Wozes, because you have to take that with this army, which gives me 15 little infantry guys that can ignore most of the terrain. They do have poison blowpipes, so they can all shoot. And they also have the stalk unseen rule, which means that they can go in and infest a terrain piece, and they're really hard to knock out from that terrain piece. And in addition, I had 4 heroes. Theoden, again, because you have to. Gamling, because you always take that when you're taking a Rohan-based army. Dernhelm, because she's the obvious third choice, and Aemir. All of those are fully kitted out with, they have to come with their horses in this list, but Aemir and Dernhelm each have throwing spears to keep up the shooting effect. And each one of them comes with 1 royal guard on horse with throwing spear, and then 2 riders of Rohan to give me a bit of long-range shooting power. So this list comes in at 15 might plus gambling, so that kind of goes off the charts as far as might goes. It's got a good amount of hitting power, especially since I've got enough might that I can always have some might in the tank to boost rolls to win dual rolls. It has it doesn't have any magic with it, but it does have a trick that goes with terrain. And one of the useful tricks you can do with this army is, because you ignore terrain and your opponent doesn't, you can actually use terrain in a way that most cavalry armies don't do, where you can sneak up on the other side of a terrain piece and then run through the terrain to the other side, either to ambush your opponent or get away from your opponent. And that's a pretty useful tactical trick to do with your move. Doesn't grind quite as well because it is a cavalry army. On the other hand, I do have plenty of might to call heroic moves, and I do tend to win those heroic move-offs 2/3 of the time, so it's better than your average cavalry army. Everything in the army shoots in one shape or form, with I think the exception of Gamling and Theoden. Although a lot of that shooting is short range. The blowpipes are only 12 inches, and the throwing spears are only 8 inches, and a number of my folks have throwing spears. But I can put out a pretty decent amount of shooting, and again, because I've got all that might and it can regenerate, things like Dernhelm can not always, but usually throw an extra point of might in to get an extra kill if they need to. Numbers are on the small side. I've got 32 models, but the mobility in this army is pretty high. The Wozes are obviously slower than the cavalry, but they can ignore most of the terrain. And Gon has 3 might that he can use to call marches if we need to. And I've got plenty of other might and other people to do other things. So this is an army that not only can move as fast as cavalry, but can pretty much always march.
Okay, so now I'm going to move over to Devin again, and we're going to start off with Devin. So the way this is going to work is, like I said earlier, I'm going to roll a die, and that's going to determine what scenario we pick. And then I'm going to roll another die, and we're going to determine what board, which none of the people on the podcast have seen yet. So that'll be up to them to figure it out from there. And then afterwards, we'll choose the opponent on the podcast that they'll be going up against. And they're going to explain to you how they're going to deal with that scenario to get the most out of it. So the scenario is going to be Lords of Battle. So you'll have to go up against Lords of Battle. And the terrain piece is going to be terrain number 1. All right, next we're going to roll to see who Devin's opponent is going to be. And that is going to be Matt Iverson.
All right.
All right.
All right.
So, everyone, I have the pleasure of fighting in the 1 round of 18 scenarios I didn't want picked. With a Horde army, Lords of Battle is obviously going to be the tougher one, but fortunately for me, it's the first round of the tournament. So, theoretically, I get an easy opponent.
Yeah,
So,
you're fighting you're fighting against one of the worst opponents you could have picked.
yeah. But unfortunately, this whole podcast is mixed of opponents that would be difficult. So essentially, let me go over the recap here. All right. So obviously, I have the Undying on Felbeast, and he's going to be extremely important in this match. Now, many versions of my list actually has the Witch King on Felbeast and such, but I think I can play the Undying exactly the way I would typically play the Witch King. So let me first start off, before we even look at the board, I need to clarify things with my opponent, make sure I understand fully how things work. And I encourage all of you to do the same thing. So I would ask Matt questions like this. And actually, Matt, I'd encourage you to answer this real quick. Just making sure I understand everything. You can do all of your models, including your Rohirrim, get the kill orc folk rule.
All friendly models.
All right, so he gets +1 to wound against everything that he fights against me.
Not +1 to wound, I re-roll ones.
Oh, reroll ones. Okay, that's a lot better. All right, perfect. So this is why we clarify. And then you also have 3 cavalry models, 1 royal guard, and 2 riders in every warband, correct?
Correct.
All right, so he's very hero heavy, so giving you a total of 32 models, but of those, the amount of actual riders is, if I'm calculating this correctly, like 16, I think?
It's actually, well, it's 12 and 4 heroes. So
12 and 4 heroes. So, okay, so 16 actual, like, mounted models. So, all right, so on this board, I've got a couple problems. So we're going to look at this board, and we know, one, there's a river. All right, and there's only 1 passing point. Now, it's a little difficult to tell here, but for the most part, it looks like I'm definitely going to cross slowly over these type of rivers. Remember, my models move half speed, and my opponent's models do not. He's probably going to leave his Woses back in to increase his breakpoint. So his Woses, in my mind, are kind of possibly an anchor point for Matt. He's going to obviously maneuver away from them to harass me, but I don't have to chase his cavalry down if I don't want to. By slaughtering his actual Ganbarigan and Woses, I can actually, I believe, almost break him. And that will give me a great potential there, because if all he does is harass, if that's all he did, not saying that would, but if all he did is harass me, then I can get to the Woses and it would force him to engage, and then we can start combat there. The Woses are 3 defense and all that. Now, what I actually expect to happen, because he picked an all-hero force, I'm expecting he's actually going to engage me and use heroic combats and his obvious potential win heroic moves to his advantage. Winning heroic moves on a 3+ often will discourage players from even calling it at all as far as a heroic move. However, my might is not important to me. It's all based around characters that, you know, I realistically don't need their might for. As far as my magic, what I intend to actually focus fire on is probably Theoden and Gambling. Gambling is actually a real easy target for me due to my Shatter Shamans and breaking his actual banner. So that is going to be priority number 1, using the Ring Wraith. So, okay. Using the Ring Wraith, bring Gambling in, bring him into a point where I can actually get the shatters off. He's going to want to keep him around anyway because he needs his guys to regenerate might. So, perfect for me. So, let's go ahead and look at this board. Where am I going to place? So, we see some models over there on the right-hand side. Lord's Battle is 24 inches up, right?
Yep.
All right. I actually think I'm going to place the full 24 inches up. I obviously don't have any bows, and the more time he has to shoot me, the more points he's going to get. So I'm going to go ahead and place my entire army probably on that river line. I'm going to ignore the bridge. I might as well use it maybe as a screening thing. So I might deploy on the right-hand side. Now, keep in mind, I don't know where he is deploying. All right, and we're not going to go through that in these scenarios, but let's say he deploys Gon and the Woses and kind of hides them. I'm going to try to – they're a single warband drop for him, and I believe you don't have to deploy all together, right? Gon is a single warband drop, but also your 4 heroes are independent, right?
Right.
Warband drops. Okay, so he can screen where his Woses go. So actually, this is pretty realistic that I wouldn't know where he's going because I'm probably not going to split myself up extremely much. I don't want him to get free kills. If I give him like warbands that are off by themselves, it's a real easy option to go and slaughter that warband. While my Felbeast is around, he has to play a little bit more cautiously. So I'm going to clump together, probably picking the terrain, on that river to the right-hand side. What looks like a hill or a cliff just beyond it, I think can limit his cavalry in the options of where they can go. So I think he's going to want to be off that left-hand side. That allows him the most amount of maneuverability, assuming that terrain piece where all the way in the top left-hand corner it's not difficult or anything like that. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. He just crosses right through that stuff anyway. So then what I'm hoping for from the cliff and the house is actual real blocking terrain. And like I said, I'm going to move his Woses, force his hand, because he doesn't want me just pile driving his Woses with them completely unguarded. He'll obviously, I think, use that as a weapon to trap me. I think he can deploy some double embellishments and such to make me fight on two different fronts. So I will have to watch for that. And the other problem with this doing what I'm about to do is you may notice the building on the top left-hand corner. And this is, by the way, assuming I'm deploying in the perspective that we're in, because I could flip the board. So with flipping the board, what you can note is that I don't have to play from this perspective. I can make it where the river is actually the north and south part of the board. I can deploy and position my body so that way I am where the cliff face is that's actually entering the water, like emptying it on the board. I can enter that way. That way I'm not penalized almost at all by the river. Now, by doing that, though, if Matt decides to shift left and right, he can slow me down pretty quickly. All right, so but just to put it in that perspective, I could shift like that. I think for this particular board, actually, it's a little tough because I know as soon as I shift top left, Matt will likely maneuver south, assuming we're in the perspective we're in. He'll likely maneuver south and then catch me with that building because it'll split my army up. And potentially, because of my slow-moving goblins, I'll take 2 or 3 turns just trying to engage him with all the forces in my army. And the guys will criticize me, but just for the sake of time, I'll say that I'm going to go ahead and deploy exactly as we are and have the Fell Beast kind of offset to the left. Not completely unguarded, but a little bit offset. Not enough so he can shoot my Fell Beast off. And yeah, I'll try to position him where I push him into that corner. And I'm mostly doing that also because his Woses slow down in the water, so I know he can't really go anywhere. And that's what I'm going to say for this scenario and my matchup, Lords of Battle. Obviously, he's going to outkill me, I think, but if I can at least keep him from doubling me, then I can go after Theoden. I will go after Gambling just to punish his power, but I will go after Theoden, and I will break his army by killing the Woses. And then that is how I can get a 5-3 win if I can pull that off. So the key is, though, keeping him from doubling me. So keeping the shields in the front, spears will be 2 rows back. He doesn't have that many bows, realistically, just enough to bring me in. But ultimately, I think after the combat lines hit, it doesn't particularly matter because Theoden and all them hit at like strength 5 anyway, I believe, on the charge. Do you still get that Rohan strength, +1 strength on the charge, though?
I get the +1 strength on the charge.
Okay. I don't think that changes anything drastically except for the fact that now you wound my goblins on 5s in close combat. So, yeah, definitely having the shields. Obviously in front, like, everyone would have probably been like, duh, yes, you would put them in the front. But what I'm saying is I'd probably put 2 rows of shields in the front and have the spears actually a little bit more protected than normal. So that's my thoughts. What do you guys think?
Can I just clarify, in terms of terrain, top left, is that a forest on a hill?
It looked like a flat piece to me. It looked like flat. If that is difficult terrain, then I would not place there. I should have clarified that, actually.
Because I'm just thinking, if that is a forest on a hill, and if that whole box is difficult terrain, then he can just hide pretty much everything there and fortify himself, and you'll never be able to get in, except with tremors.
And that's very true. Actually, I should also clarify with my opponent, is that difficult terrain? So here, let me ask that. Matt, is that difficult terrain at the top left?
No.
Matt says yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think clearly that the patch of woods on it is difficult terrain. And then the hill probably, I would say that the hill probably is not, although it's the same thing where, we'd have to, it probably is like your goblins are probably gonna have to climb up the edge of that hill because that.
Oh, you would say I need to climb, like climb tests.
Well, yeah, do a climb test because I suspect that hill is going to be more than the height of your goblins, half the height of your goblins and orcs, which means.
Okay, then
so there's some defending barriers going on.
Yeah, Yeah, that might be a little bit of a problem. I mean, yeah, I get +1 to the climb test. So, okay, so note everyone watching that asking your opponent what exactly that is definitely changes things. I could challenge it by a judge ruling, but realistically, Matt will probably win that. And I'll set off the game in a pretty bad light where I'm challenging things we haven't even started. So I'll go ahead and I actually will try to flip the board. I think because that cliff is so much, I think I'll flip the board and actually deploy coming toward where our perspective is.
So north to south.
Yeah, so I would be on the other side, and I'm going to come down, and I'm going to – so Matt would either have that cliff that's going to limit his mobility because he can't just run through that on the bottom right, or he'll go to the bottom left, in which case his cavalry don't have a lot of room to maneuver. So I think I'm going to do that. I'm actually going to flip the board, and I'm going to come south. So going off that, Mick made a really good point, and the only reason I'm changing my mind is because I neglected to ask my opponent what was that at the top left. I just assumed it was clear terrain. So go ahead, Mick. Sorry about that.
Well, I just saw some trees on it, and I thought people are going to argue that the whole thing counts as a forest, as a hill forest for my wozes to hide if I was Matt. So. I fully agree with your reasoning going north to south. There's far fewer possibilities for Matt to actually run around and maneuver around there because of all those hills and those buildings. So he plus there is a very small choke point between the hill in the bottom right quarter and the house. So it's quite tricky to get through that. And another small choke point in the top left. So I mean, on one hand, lack of open terrain against so many big heroes that Matt has might be quite tricky to overcome because you might just get yourself stuck fighting against just his heroes and not the actual riders and wozes that you want to be fighting. Yeah. But at the same time, I think you're better off just ensuring that he's just standing in the corner, and then maybe your Felbeast can potentially hurl something through his heroes or through his horses. Yeah, and then do things with Tremor and hopefully break through. But I think generally you're at a disadvantage in this game. Obviously because of the scenario.
Well, it's basically just the same thing that you guys have said. I feel like the two main advantages you have here in this scenario, Devin, are one, the Undying on Felbeast. You can put down a lot of basically fear tactics and a lot of control with the spells and the 12-inch movement. And yeah, the wozes are definitely a problem for my father because with all cavalry, what he could do is he could just try and circle camp you, and with the ability to negate those difficult terrain, it can be really challenging for you. But if you can track down those wozes, if you can get them into a spot where you want them to be, he's going to have to engage you with your cavalry, with his cavalry rather, and that could definitely be advantageous for you. The only problem is he could try a tactic of trying to back into a corner and stopping you from getting your full weight of numbers to bear. That can cause problems because it's Lords of Battle, right? So if you can't get your numbers in and get those kills quickly, he's going to rack up a bunch of kills and it can be hard for you to get. But I think still trying to back him into a relatively open corner would probably be your best strategy here.
And I guess what I would say as far as where the wozes are going to end up deploying in one of three places, and I haven't quite figured it out yet. Place number one is on that wooded hill with cliffs around three sides on the lower right-hand side of the board. And they will just sit on there and be able to have spear support. And gambling would probably end up hiding in those woods too. So you'd have banner-supported, spear-supported wozes defending cliffs and with blowpipes. So you can't even get close to that hill. And I just say, come up and get me. Option two would be on top of, if you see the rock outcropping by the waterfall on the right-hand side of the board, that would be the second place to camp them all out and just kind of use that as a turret to shoot from and have my cavalry move around that. Option three, depending on the size of it, is if you see that wall on the very bottom side of the board there, if I could fit all 16 of them up there, they may all just stand on top of the wall. and shoot. But those are the options. So yeah, I mean, the plan here obviously is to put the Wozos in a fortress where you can't kill them without taking greater losses than I'm going to inflict, while just having the cavalry just move around, never engage, and shoot.
I'll just add, I'm just going to add one more thing. If you can see from this picture, I can see someone's legs on the left side of the board. So this is obviously the way the board is positioned. Naturally, you'd be going from left to right or from right to left. But just
they're playing Chaos and Arda. Or some other, what are they playing? It's some mission where they're split up into 4 corners. I'm not sure.
No, I'm just pointing out that for the viewers that you are able to play north to south or east to west or in every way, because a lot of players sometimes just forget this thing that you can actually pick any borders you want, not just the one that comes from your sort of corridor where your bags are lying and from where you're standing.
And absolutely, I had actually mentioned it during my analysis, and I was thinking I didn't want the water running north and south. I wanted the water to be behind me, and so that way I don't have to deal with it, because that's a pure advantage state for him. I already know the woods are too, which is why I flipped the board and came the other direction. But I'm trying to put the water behind me and then run into terrain where he doesn't have quite the advantage of his waypoint markers. But yes, absolutely true that you can flip the board and run with the water going between the 2 players. So.
Alrighty. Next, we're going to move over to Mick. So I'm going to roll a dice to see what Mick gets. So the scenario Mick is going to get is Contest of Champions.
Yeah, I get the best scenario.
And now we're going to roll to see what piece of terrain he's going to be on. And finally, we're going to roll to see who his opponent's going to be. Mr. Evan Iverson. All right, so Mick, you got to do Contest of Champions on this board against Evan's army.
Okay, cool. So scenario is Contest of Champions. So my warbands get to deploy in my half of the board, and the victory conditions are if my general, well, my leader, kills more models than my opponent's leader, then I score 3 points. If that number is doubled, then I score 5 points, and if it's tripled, I score 7 points. And then the usual points for breaking my opponent and killing their general. Plus, there is a special rule that whenever either hero kills a multi-wound model, they regain a point of might. So my leader has to be Elrond, because he's the only hero of legend in my army. So in this case, let me just pull up Evan's list. So I'm fighting against Bard, kids, Alfred, and Gandalf, Legolas, and a lot of militia. So my first thoughts here, just looking at the 2 armies, are that even though under normal circumstances, Elrond could very quickly get into combat, into a safe spot and start killing, the problem I have is that my opponent has both Legolas and Gandalf, who will be trying to get rid of Elrond as quickly as possible, especially of Elrond's horse. Legolas essentially kills Elrond's horse on a 2+ with all the might points. So Elrond will probably be fighting without his horse for most of the game. And so on that basis, I feel like it will be to my advantage to start the game actually further back than I can possibly do. Except Elrond has to start somewhere in the middle of the board. So even though initially it seems like I may be in an advantageous position here, just looking at the armies, the scenario itself, the starting conditions and the fact that there is Legolas on the other side of the board make it quite tricky. So in this case, can we just clarify, what is that terrain in the middle?
So the terrain in the middle is, it's actually the troll shaws. Yep, it's the troll shaws. So I would actually, it's definitely, I've seen that board up close. It's definitely difficult terrain. There's lots of wooded patches, and it's about 6 inches by 4 inches ish. Like I think about that?
Okay. So right, and that's set precisely in the middle, correct?
It's precisely in the middle.
Okay, cool. So for choosing sides, I would probably choose the side going from right to left. That's because, actually, no. Yeah, this is actually quite difficult. Yeah, I would probably spend a couple of minutes thinking about this. Yeah, because the problems I have at the moment here is that I am being outshot. Elrond is in a tricky situation in combat because of Legolas, and my opponent outnumbers me. However, my army is much better on the charge. Right, so I would probably set up on the left, and I'd be going towards the right. Elrond would be set in the middle. The knights would be set in a line behind him, probably staying somewhere where I can potentially charge in the first turn. So this sort of depends on who gets to set up first. If my opponent gets to set up first, then I would set up about 7 inches away from his line. If I get to set up first, then I would probably set something like 7 inches from the middle line. And then leave Elrond and Aragorn in the middle, within that difficult terrain. Hopefully somewhere near my edge of the difficult terrain, so that Elrond can get out if he needs to, and also to be able to move around and charge soon. And then I would take it. I would take the game depending really on what my opponent does, because I feel like he has more options here. And so I'm going to be more of a reactionary force. One thing that I should note, though, is that first time I'm ever going to charge with Elrond, I will probably dismount him first and then get into combat. Because if I were to charge and his horse gets shot down by Legolas, then he will very likely not even be able to make any strikes in combat. So I'm just assuming that Elrond's horse will be dead in this game. So that's pretty much all my thoughts.
All right. Just to clarify, who is Evan's general? Is it Gandalf or is it Thranduil?
I don't have Thranduil. I have
No, it's
Bard.
Bard.
He's the only hero.
It's Bard and Gandalf.
Oh, he's got
It must
Bard
be
because
him.
he's
It
legend.
has to be Bard,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. Sorry. I was thinking. Okay. So, and just to also clarify, Mick, you said you put Elrond and Aragorn in the woods?
No. I would put Elrond within 3 inches of the center of the board, as the scenario requires. I would put him somewhere, obviously closer to my side. So hopefully, if I can fit him outside of that little terrain piece, then I would. If I can't, then obviously not. And then Aragorn will be somewhere nearby, just in case there was a random situation like Bard and Legolas suddenly want to go against Elrond. I want to be able to protect him just in case. But yeah, Aragorn would be somewhere central-ish, within charging range on turn 1 of all of my opponent's troops.
Would you try to assassinate the girls to try to lure Bard out by using the Rivendell Knights, or do you think you don't have time for a round of shooting?
It really depends on my opponent's setup. If let's say, if he was to be moving first and then pick Gandalf and do a blinding light, then I would probably be trying to charge as soon as possible and just see what happens. But if, let's say, he didn't do a blinding light, then yes, there is a pretty good chance that my bows are able to get through, especially if, let's say, I were to choose not to move on turn 1, then there's going to be a lot of hits, especially with Aragorn potentially doing a heroic accuracy on turn 1 as well. So there is that option to assassinate the girls. Obviously, they'll probably be in the 4th or 5th line, so it's not very likely, but it's possible.
Yeah, that's a tough matchup. I mean, as far as your decisions, I do think going from east to west, having that side is the better option, mostly because if you do manage to break out, you have a lot of open play. Like
Exactly. Yeah.
your army's highly mobile. I mean, being on the other side, I think Evan would probably try to force you that way if he got the roll. So basically, definitely agree with that. Makes perfect sense to me. Note everyone who's watching that his cavalry do not have the ability to run through the woods. So it actually, being in the woods actually is a pure advantage state for Evan being an infantry army, because actually cavalry moves slower than infantry in the forest. And plus he's got Thranduil and a Sentinel. So, there's that. But
There's Legolas and Sentinel, no?
Yeah,
That's
Legolas.
Thranduil.
wait, so Thranduil's not in the list.
There's no Thranduil, no. There's Legolas and
Sorry,
Sentinel.
I don't know why I heard Thranduil. Oops, sorry,
If
Legolas.
Thranduil was in my list, he would be the leader.
Okay, all right, perfect.
If Thranduil was in the list, I would be much happier, honestly.
I'm sorry about that. I keep thinking Thranduil was in the list. So Legolas, sorry. So Legolas is obviously not going to go aggressive then. So never mind on that. But still, obviously, you don't want to be in the woods. You lose pretty much all your advantages, except for the lances, I believe. I agree with your decision. That's the only way to go about it. The only other option you have is really to put two. So when you deploy, basically Mick has to deploy himself, his Elrond model, 3 inches from the center. Okay, he has to do that, but it doesn't say necessarily where he has to deploy his men in Elrond's warband. Obviously 6 inches from Elrond, but they don't have that same restriction. So you could screen with a couple cav and then allow him to buy himself time to escape if he wanted to. And I say specifically a couple. I think their bases are large enough and there's enough forest where it'll be hard for Evan to get in there. I don't know what the advantage of pulling away is, considering Evan outshoots Mick, but that is an option. I think if Mick did pull away, it would only be for a turn to dictate the new charge point. But yeah, it's definitely a hard fight. What do you guys think, Evan?
I mean, to be fair, also, my knights have to be set up within 6 inches of Elrond, so I kind of have to be somewhere centralish with everything. So I mentioned earlier that I'd be staying 7 inches away from Evan if possible, but that's not actually possible because I can't actually set up in a line and then possibly charge and shoot. I sort of have to be all in one bunch. Yeah, essentially, mostly within that really difficult terrain. So yeah, this situation really sucks for me.
I mean, yeah, it certainly is. So there's a couple things that I would do. I think turn 1 would be very, very important in this particular scenario. Turn 1, I'd try to play very reactionary based on who wins the heroic move off and what Mick does with his deployment. If he screens with the knights and tries to get Elrond out of there, what I want to do is try and focus on getting Bard a couple of kills so that now Mick needs to come to me because I'm winning. If he deploys the knights back and I win the move off, I'll probably try and surround Elrond, stop him from escaping, and then just wall off and try and survive against the Rivendell Knights while my heroes attack Elrond. If he runs away by winning the heroic move off, I'd probably play more defensively. Move my army back a bit, cast Blinding Light with Gandalf, and try and go for the shooting war to try and pull him back forward. Other than that, what Mick said, basically using Gandalf and Legolas to try and neutralize Elrond. If I can get Bard in on a lone Rivendell Knight with the free heroic combat, I'll do that to get a couple of kills. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward.
Any thoughts, Matt?
No, I think pretty much it's been covered. I mean, really, I think this scenario comes down to whether Evan tries to flash kill Elrond and swarm him or not.
Yeah, there was actually another thing I was going to add about the screening of Elrond with knights. Gandalf's Sorcerer's Blast, even though it became weaker in this edition, it's still very powerful at picking up a knight and throwing the knight into Elrond and then ending the game for Elrond, basically. So I can't really screen very, very easily, very effectively.
Actually, that's the worst part about you needing to deploy in a ball. You are almost guaranteed
Yeah.
to have a Rivendell Knight in a position where he'll throw Elrond on the ground.
It's a pretty bad scenario given that my opponent has Legolas, and at the same time, the matchup is quite tricky in that if I wanted to move back and shoot, he has Blinding Light. If I wanted to move forward, well, it's just gonna be essentially a turn of combat to see what happens.
Alrighty. Next, we're going to move on to Evan. So the scenario Evan has been given is command the battlefield. This will be the board he will be given. And next, we're going to roll to see who his opponent will be. And it is going to be the man himself, Devin Moreno. So Evan, tell us how you'd go through this game.
Okay, so first I should probably go over kind of what happens with command the battlefield. So there are basically 4 objectives, and also there are objectives for wounding and killing the enemy leader and breaking. But the main objectives are the 4 board quarters, basically. And what you do is, so when you're near when you're in that board corner, you get victory points depending on how many models you have there compared to your opponent. And within 12 inches of the center of the board, you cannot score the point. So basically, you want to be on the outside of the board, not on the inside, because then you won't get victory. Deployment is Maelstrom of Battle. So it's just a normal thing where you roll and you see which board side you come on. Other than that, it ends at quarter. So I guess now I will go into how I play the game. So I'm going against Devin, right?
Yes.
So obviously the first thing is Maelstrom, and there's a couple of ways I want to do this. First, we figure out, does Devin win priority or do I win priority? If Devin wins priority. How many warbands do you have, Devin?
I have, here, hold on one second, go back to my list because I'm looking at the scenario. Oh, I think I have 6, and keep in mind I have Gurits, just to throw that back out there. But yeah, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep.
So if Devin wins priority, either Gurits does well and he gets all of his warbands in the same spot, or I get lucky and a warband appears in some random place that's far away from the rest of his army. Then obviously, if that's the case, I jump that. If that's not the case, I simply just try and keep my army together, because with his large army, it can be fatal for me to lose a warband to getting swamped and killed. So if I win priority, the same logic applies. I try to keep myself together. Preferably, I deploy in the middle of a board edge so that I can cover two of the board quarters at the same time to try and get Devin to come to me. Deploying like far into the corner means that if Devin gets his deployment right, he can cover 3 board quarters, and obviously that's a losing situation. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to try and chase down a 72 model Mordor Moria army. Basically, the objective will be to try and get enough space so that if I want to move guys around to the objectives, I can, whilst still trying to bring Devin in, get some kills with shooting. Obviously, the Undying will be the priority with Gandalf and Legolas. Legolas kind of has problems against the Undying because he can't just do a shot, burn all of his might points, and try and kill him, because the Undying has, 18 will? In this
he has 18 will, yep, that can be used as fate.
He can use that as fate. So that's obviously not a viable option. Obviously, compelling and sorcerer's blasting and stuff like that with Gandalf will still be incredibly threatening to him. Because the Undying only is 2 might, if I can burn through enough might points and will points, and I get a sorcerer's blast off, that basically neutralizes his Felbeast's full potential, which will help me a bunch. what I also want to do is I want to try and get a choke point because obviously he outnumbers me, but I don't want to leave my options too closed because still need to keep the objectives in mind. Let's see here. So you have Gurits, you have a Shatter Shaman, or 2 Shatter Shamans, or just 1?
I have 2.
Okay, 2 Shatter Shamans. Okay, so the Shatter Shamans will also be a problem. There are 2 ways I could play my heroes. I could either play very conservatively and try and get some Legolas shots on the Shatter Shamans, maybe kill one if I'm lucky, which would be nice. Gandalf also is a super useful magical power for this if I win priority. I may also try and get my archers, see here, maybe up on top or in one of these buildings there. The building on the top right, obviously it's very hard to get there, but if I can get my archers there, they serve 2 purposes. One, they can get elevated shots, so I can shoot at the Undying, maybe be able to shoot at the shamans and stuff like that. They also get me points for that board quarter without my opponent really being able to contest that. Yeah, honestly, in this case, I would just focus on breaking Devin to try and reduce his numbers because, I mean, you can't win a board control scenario when your opponent is 72 models on the field. Yeah, that would kind of be my end condition. Go up, kill them, try and break him. Once I break him, send in the shieldman, shield for as long as possible, grab as many objectives. Cross your fingers and pray that the people that are not within standfast range of his heroes fail their courage tests, which will help out a lot in the board control aspect. Other than that, is the Undying your leader?
Yes.
Focus the Undying. Honestly, if he's on the ground and you get barred into him and you have a decent amount of might, you can do a ton of damage or maybe even kill him. And other than that, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Kill the army and then try and grab the objectives while stalling for time.
Admittedly, I thought about making Durbert's the leader, but he's so squishy. So, but
Anyone have any thoughts on that?
yeah, I mean, as far as what I'm hearing, I think Evan's got it right. I mean, command the battlefield. Actually, it's kind of funny that we're all getting scenarios that don't work really well for us against our opponent. But essentially, yeah, command of the battlefield. I would clearly have an advantage here. I think he's right on the money with trying to break me. I do not think he can play a game where he's dividing his forces up and fighting me piecemeal. I do think he has to be kind of centered. He has the advantage in combat. He outfights me and also has banner rerolls. So he can do extremely well in a grind fight with me. So, I mean, I actually think trying to just take me down is the best strategy. The problem is I could probably try to use it to my advantage and divide myself up. If I can also kind of keep you centered, then, and I believe you didn't say you would deploy in the center of the board, right? Like, because that's the worthless land, but I don't know if that's what you said. Is that what you said?
It's Maelstrom of Battle, so I can't do that.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, so then, yeah, this will really depend on where you kind of go. But I do think still, even regardless of hearing that, I think breaking me is the best overall strategy. I'm assuming if you went first, you would not try to piecemeal yourself up, right?
Oh yeah, I definitely focus on keeping myself together. It's very dangerous to piecemeal yourself against a force that is larger than yours.
There's a strategy I decide to use in order to conserve might when I don't have a multiplier where I can like add +1 to my reserve rolls and such. I try to actually deploy on corners. That way, if I get a roll of a 4 or a 5, I'm still where I want to be. So that means I only have to spend a point of might on a 3 or a 2. But I actually try to stay in corners. Does that make sense? I don't know if that's what you would do.
Yeah, there's definitely there's definitely a real decision to make with that, because either you can try and burn as little might as possible. Obviously, you said try and deploy in corners. That means keep a lot of resources, or you can go like full on try and deploy in the center of a board edge, because what the center of the board edge does is it means you can grab two quarter objectives immediately, which would mean that it would be harder for your opponent to try and overwhelm the quarters and take the objectives. But honestly, it's really personal preference what you do with that. If you think might will be much more valuable in this game, then try and deploy in the corner. If you don't believe that and you just want to get as much of an advantage as soon as possible, then try and deploy in the center of.
Mick, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's, again, very important to clarify some of the terrain here, because the tower in the top right of the board, it appears to me that it's going to expand more than 6 inches from the corner. So I would just be interested, how would you guys play that? If, let's say, say you were to roll north-south, and then your opponent picked the place on the northern board edge, would your warband potentially have to deploy above, like on the top floor, or?
I mean, you could. So yeah, actually, it's a good clear point, Mick, since you've never played on this board before. That tower is directly up against the edge and is designed in such a way where it's obvious some of it's missing, so that way it's like you walk right up on and start on that. Mm-hmm. So if you were to deploy north-south, like you had mentioned, and you wanted to stay up on that terrain piece, and obviously I'll just talk about it despite the fact that it's gone, but if you were to try to stay up there, then yeah, you would just walk on. So yeah, you would you could walk right onto that. To climb, you can climb up and down the waterfalls that you saw there. There's a lot of rocks and they're very obvious places, and of course you can take that ramp that you saw.
Yeah, you probably don't want to climb up there, but it's just that if your opponent gets to choose where you're gonna deploy, and they tell you, okay, you have to deploy there at the top of that.
Then you could put a whole warband up there.
Yeah, sure.
You can get really screwed.
It just really takes away your whole warband, because then by the time you actually manage to get down through the whole thing, it's gonna be the entire game.
Yep.
So yeah, it's quite interesting. It's like if let's say Evan was to actually put the archers there, then I would probably just like ignore that whole quarter, because at the same time there is actually very little space that you can actually occupy other than on the top of the tower to actually be within the deployment area for the objective, because like the 12 inches sort of almost reaches the tower as far as I can see. So there's very little that you can actually be doing there.
So now that I'm actually just understanding, a light bulb clicked in my head as you were kind of speaking. So I believe, and I have to double check this, but I believe Alex Wright, he designed the board that I asked him to make that exactly 6 inches so that you can't start up there in Maelstrom. You can start up there in any other mission, but in Maelstrom, I don't think you can force someone onto that. So cool. I do think it's exactly 6 inches, and that was a design choice. So, but I have to recheck that. Now, if it's not, what I would recommend to anyone who's watching is agree with your opponent that space is a no man's land, and that will stop that kind of situation from happening. Now, if you don't get that, you can call a judge, and a judge will likely rule in your favor, because they would also agree that pretty much just takes a warband and throws it away.
Yeah.
So I think that if it's not 6 inches, which I do think it is, but if it's not, then I would try to get an agreement with an opponent or at least a judge just to stop that from happening.
I mean, I'd be happy to allow someone to actually walk up that sort of staircase. Well, no, it wasn't a staircase, just like this.
It was a ramp,
Ramp up all the way. Sure, just send half of your army that way. I don't care. But like if you just start there, then it makes the game potentially very uneven if someone either gets an unlucky warband there, or if the other person just very likely gets all of the archers there.
And just to clarify, Mick, so this table that you just saw was actually one of the bottom table as a Nova open, so the tables get a little bit more fair as you go up the ranks. So these tables, there's an expectation that both players will talk about it. And so.
Well, this is round one, and you both are
round one.
On the bottom table. So.
So yeah, I mean, there's an expectation to talk about it. Not that they have this at other tournaments, but at Nova you can ask to switch your table with one of these generic ones that we have. Like because if you're trying to compete to win and you're like, this board totally crushes me, I need to move, like, then we do have boards set aside for specifically on purpose. So, but anyway, yeah, I mean, that's that clarifies that piece of the corner, which I think was a great shout out. Also, just so anyone's watching, I don't think this was brought up, but you can enter those buildings as well. So those buildings are massive blocks of terrain. You may have noticed they are occupying a lot of space. They actually have doors on all the sides, and actually one of them, there's no doors at all. You can just walk in and out at any point. It's like a pavilion, I guess you can say. So Evan has, the ability to hide in those buildings. Let's say if he wants to throw like a guy or two in there and then make it where the opponent forgets that that model even exists, you can pretty much reveal it at the end of the game and be like, nope, I had a guy in there. I mean, as long as you kind of made that clear so that the opponent doesn't think you snuck him in there, which I don't think they would, because it's pretty obvious, like, he's in the building. But that's a way, like, whenever you see covered rooftops like that and the game is based on how many models are around, you can kind of, surprise your opponent. So
we're just back from the technical errors here. Matt has rolled to play against Mick, and this is the board that's been decided that they'll be playing on. I'm now going to roll scenario to see which scenario they'll be playing in. And he has been given Heirloom of Ages Past.
Heirloom of Ages Past. Okay.
That's when you always get the booze in every tournament. Every time that one comes up, everyone.
So just so people know, the scoring points for this are: you score 6 points if your force is in possession of the relic at the end of the game. If at the end of the game you are not in possession of the relic, but you have more models within 3 inches of the relic than your opponent, then you instead score 3 victory points. You score 1 victory point for causing 1 or more wounds on the enemy leader. Wounds prevented by fate do not count. If you kill the enemy's leader, you get 2 victory points. You score 1 victory point if the enemy force is broken at the end of the game. You get 2 victory points if they're broken and you're not. And you get 1 victory point if you have a banner at the end of the game. And you get 2 victory points if you have a banner and they do not have a banner. So, Matt, tell us how you're going to go into this.
So first, just to describe the map for folks who aren't necessarily viewing this on screen, this is a completely flat Moria board with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 large pillars and some broken pillars kind of strewn about. So there's absolutely no difficult terrain that I can use to my advantage. So this continues the trend of getting some of the worst possible board and opponent matchups I could. So as I'm looking at this, my advantage is I have numbers and I have more than one warband, which in most Maelstrom of Battle scenarios would actually be a disadvantage because Mick is going to be showing up in essentially one place. I'm assuming Aragorn is going to spend enough might as he needs to get his warband to come on in one place. I think my advantage is I have a lot of small cavalry warbands that can show up in different places away from his troops to try and find the heirloom. And I do have some guys that I wouldn't mind dismounting to get on. So I think, so the first thing that I need to think about is where am I going to place heirloom markers? And I think in this particular case, I want to put heirloom markers around the edges of the board as far apart as I can from each other, so that I have a chance to. I'm going to try and pick one to secure, and then I'm going to try and grab as many as I can with the other warbands to see if I can get the correct one first, because what I want to try and do, I don't want to try and get into a stationary gunfight against 18 Rivendell Knights and Aragorn, all of whom except Aragorn get to reroll to hits, because I'm going to lose that fight. So I think what I end up trying to do is I'm going to try and grab one of these heirlooms and hope I get the right one far away from Mick's main body, and then play keep away for the rest of the game. I think that's the plan as far as the heirlooms go. The rest of it is going to come down to the Maelstrom of Battle deployment. I think what I would probably do, and obviously who's going to start first. If Mick wins this die roll and I figure out where he is, then that's going to, that's obviously going to kind of change my deployment. I think what I likely want to do is one of two things. If he ends up all in one place, what I may actually want to do is, if he's not near an objective, then I may have the Wozus come on and try and secure an objective near the edge, and see if I can do it in such a way that they can hide behind some sort of terrain piece and kind of cover that objective and prevent stray cavalry from coming in and getting it, not necessarily getting charged because of their stalk unseen rule. And there are some kind of scattered terrain pieces around here that I could use to do that. And I think I would end up putting my objective markers kind of right next to terrain pieces, so I'd be more likely to use cover to be able to do that. If Mick is sitting on a heirloom or an objective marker of his own, or at least sitting near it, what I may actually try and do is send one warband, probably Dernhelm, and her job is just going to be to try and come on near that, get a heroic move off, get on top of that, and pick off the heirloom marker that Mick is trying to protect if he hasn't set it up wrong, and force him to go and try and get a different heirloom marker. Otherwise, I'm going to have my Wozus sitting on one and try and grab as many of the others as I can. Hope I roll a 6, and then, like I said, and then just kind of run away at that point, and get in and try and get into a relatively protected position with it, where Mick's got to come after me, and then try and make a fight out of it there. The other option that I have, depending kind of on how my rolls come out and where he starts, especially if he starts on a restricted frontage, if you look at this board, there are three columns, maybe about 8 inches in from each corner of the board, and they're pretty significant columns. They're probably about 4 inches on a side. So one of the things that Mick may end up doing is if he comes on in a corner and he comes on all in a bunch, what I may try and do as an alternative is just get my entire army surrounding him, try and pen him in to the point where he can't maneuver, and rush him. And that may actually be a better alternative strategy. Maybe just have 1 or 2 riders kind of running around picking up markers, heirloom markers, to see if I can get the right one. And so I guess those are the 2 strategies, kind of depending on how his initial deployment comes out, or whether or not he deploys first or second. So probably if he deploys second, then I'm going to try and pick my marker someplace as secure as I can, and then try and grab all the other ones and just give him too many markers to try and cover. If he comes on first and he comes in a ball near the corner of the board, I might just try and use my numbers against him have everything come on adjacent, try and win the heroic move off, and just kind of smash him into that corner and see if I can grind him down.
Yeah, I think actually your first point you had made about avoiding him probably would have been the wrong strategy, in my opinion, just because he just shoots so effectively. I think he'll just gun you off the board. But when you changed it up to your alternate strategy of actually engaging, I do think that's probably the better route. I do agree with your strategy of, to hold one heirloom and try to grab all the other ones and then end the game through sheer combat. He doesn't have enough models to realistically, maneuver around what you throw at him. So I think, I agree with that strategy overall as far as like trying to just, swarm him as much as possible. I definitely would not avoid and run away from his army. I think he'll have enough time to just gun you down to a point where you're not broken exactly, or maybe you're passing your test, but he can just run in and then do heroic combats to try to kill whoever has the relic. So just my thoughts on that.
Yeah, a lot of it depends on kind of who comes on first. If he comes on first, I know where he is. It's going to be a lot easier to mass against him and try and kill him. If I'm coming on first, not knowing where he's going to show up, that becomes a big problem, because if I show up all in one place, he can then show up all in one place on the other side of the board. And that's a point where I basically got to kind of run all the way across the board to try and get him. And I don't think that strategy is necessarily going to work. So I think if I come on first, I think I want to take the strategy of try and grab as many of the relics as I can in order to see if I can get the relic and then hide it. And at that point, once I have the relic, I think that point I kill myself.
Yeah.
Get it down to 25% to end the game.
Mick, any thoughts on your opponent's strategy?
Yeah, I guess I would add. I pretty much agree with everything Matt said, and you, Devin. I suppose if you were to be deploying first, then any sort of bad scattered rolls across the board really hurt you, because I can just run on pretty much 20 models into one place and just run over whatever your scattered troops are. So I think if you're deploying first, you're gonna be spending a lot of might, probably trying to keep yourself together, only for me to then stay safely away. But yeah, if I'm deploying first, then I think I agree. I would just try to engage me as soon as possible. It will really entirely depend on who goes first and on your rolls. Yeah, if you get slightly unlucky, then you might just end up being here. At which point I can just sort of run from one place to another and to another, and just be picking up things. And I probably wouldn't really be tapping too many objectives early on my side, because I don't really want to be dismounting anything early on. So I would be trying to take control of as much of the board as I can, and sort of like secure as many of those objectives as I can without actually touching them.
Evan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think they said a lot of very good points here, and I think what it really boils down to is space and how the players control the space. Because if Mick can manage to keep a nice open area where he has objectives and where he can maneuver around and get out of the way of my father's models, he can probably effectively shoot out a bunch of guys, camp out on some objectives, just make it really challenging for my father to really get anything going. If Dad, on the other hand, is able to choke up enough space and push Mick back into a corner and cover a lot of objectives, it may be incredibly challenging for Mick to come back and get those objectives. So that's about it.
There's probably another point I'd add, that even if I get charged, Elrond can just be standing behind the lines and always just cast a Wrath of Ruin here or there to knock down Matt's models. So I can sort of like, even even though I am being charged, I may be fighting against models who are already on the ground. So that's a slight defense mechanism there. But ideally, for you, I think, yeah, you just want to get engaged as quickly as possible and just hope that you can kill as many of the knights as you can.
Yeah, I mean, I do have one trick I can use. I mean, I do have 5 heroes, each of which, you know, a number of which have either 2 will or 3 will. And I have plenty of might to throw into the resistance. So as long as I kind of space, I think if I'm fighting you, what I want to try and do is I want to try and get basically all of my heroes into 1 or hopefully 2 of your knights, not your heroes. If Elrond's back behind the lines, that's fine. And be calling heroic strikes. And I've got enough will and enough might behind it that I can probably shrug off. If I put the heroes spaced far enough, I can probably shrug off a couple of Wrath of Bruinans, and hopefully in that process kill enough knights to really knock you down in numbers, to the point where, you know, numbers will bear. Because I mean, that is one advantage I have, is I do have 4 mounted heroes against your 2 mounted heroes, and then I've got, you know, Gon, who can be running in and spending his might on making the heroic moves happen.
Yeah, but at the same time, you also have to always be spending might on heroic strikes because fight value is the same on both sides. So
Yep.
that will hopefully be burning down quite a bit of might on your side.
Although
Gambling will be important.
yeah, gambling is always important in this
Yeah,
game.
of course, yeah.
I think that's it.
I mean, the other thing is, it's kind of an interesting dichotomy as far as if I come on first. I mean, if I come on first, I'm in a problem. I'm definitely in a bad position, and I really am not sure whether I want to start all massed together, or, which is, you know, typically the way you do it in this scenario, or separate to try and grab as many objectives as I can. I mean, I guess it kind of depends where the objectives end up coming down. But I think this is one of those rare scenarios where there might be an advantage for me to start separate, and understanding that you'll be able to, you know, so I can start separate in 5 separate groups, and I understand you're going to be able to come on and just overwhelm one of those groups, but you can really only overwhelm one of those groups. And if I can snap up 3 or 4 objective markers in exchange for that, and maybe roll a 6 on one of them, that might actually be worth it.
Maybe, yeah. Well, we're not moving as fast as the signal tower would be moving, but we both have 15-inch movement through most of the game. So, yeah, I think it would be very interesting to see this game play out.
Yeah.
Oh, and Mick, this is also a table like at Nova, so just know they're not all swamped with terrain.
That's fine. This is it. As long as this is the second from the bottom, then I'll be playing that.
Mick, you might be able to move 15 inches, but that doesn't mean you can move a mountain. I mean,
Sure.
the signal tower's there to stay.
Well, the other thing that's slightly different between our 2 armies is you can move 15 inches, but you can only move 15 inches in one direction.
Yeah.
Where I have the capability to kind of scatter away from you. Which would, and if you're moving 15 inches, you're not shooting me, which is, I think, probably a win for me. So.
Well, if you're moving 15 inches, you're not shooting me, so.
That is true. Yeah, I have a bunch of throwing spears with might behind them, so sure. Sometimes I am. So.
All right, thank you for joining us this week. If you have any lists you'd like to submit to us for us to review, please leave them in the comments section below. And if you have any thoughts of what you'd like to see in future content, please leave that as well. And we hope you have a good day.